By the time the HOA president blocked the Wildfire helicopter from landing on my field, I had already decided I was going to let them dig their own graves. Figuratively, though after seeing the fire line coming over the ridge, I wasn't ruling out the literal. Imagine a 40-foot wall of flame crawling down toward your property and some guy in a polo shirt and mirrored sunglasses telling you, "This is private neighborhood airspace." I wish I was joking. The pilot hovered above us, rotors kicking up dust like a sandstorm, and shouted something I couldn't hear over the thumping blades. Meanwhile, Barry, that's the president, stood there waving his arms like he was flagging in a 747, except instead of helping, he was actively trying to get the chopper to leave. The crew in the helicopter had just spotted my pond. It wasn't much, but in the middle of a dry summer, it was gold. They were going to drop a bucket in, scoop water, and dump it on the advancing flames. The kind of thing that saves homes, maybe lives. Barry stepped in front of me, jabbing a finger toward the sky. That helicopter is trespassing. They can't use common area resources without HOA approval. My pond isn't common area. My pond isn't even in the HOA. But when you live on the edge of their fiefdom, and your driveway happens to pass through their jurisdiction, they act like they own you. I told him flat out to get out of the way. He said, "The bylaws are clear. Emergency equipment must be approved through the board unless deployed by county officials." That's when I pointed at the fire and asked if he wanted me to call the board and hold a meeting while my house turned into charcoal. His reply? "Don't be dramatic. It's still a quarter-mile away." Smoke was already in my throat. The pilot wasn't waiting for a committee vote. The chopper dipped lower, bucket swinging. That's when two other HOA board members, Pamela and Rick, pulled up in a golf cart like they were chasing a runaway teenager. Pamela had a clipboard. She always had a clipboard. She started scribbling furiously while Rick shouted, "You'll be fined for this. That's HOA water." The bucket hit the pond anyway, spraying us all with muddy droplet. Barry yelled something about property rights over the roar. The helicopter lifted away toward the ridge, leaving them sputtering. I thought that would be the end of it, maybe a nasty letter, a few threats of legal action. But when I saw them photographing my property an hour later, with smoke getting thicker, I realized this was going to escalate fast. That night, while I was hosing down my roof, my phone buzzed. A voicemail from Pamela. "Per HOA bylaws, you have violated airspace use restrictions and unauthorized allocation of community resources. You are hereby fined $3,500, payable within 30 days. Failure to comply will result in a lien on your property." I replayed it twice, partly because I couldn't believe it and partly because I wanted to memorize her exact phrasing. The fire never reached my house thanks to that helicopter, but the HOA wasn't letting go. The next morning, Barry himself walked up my drive with an envelope. He had that smug, rehearsed smile, like a man who thinks he's the sheriff in a one-horse town. I opened it while he stood there. Inside was the fine notice, plus an emergency assessment for alleged damage to common land caused by helicopter rotor wash. That common land was my pasture, which had been brown and dead for weeks. "You can fight it if you want," Barry said, "but we'll win. We always do." Then he turned and walked off like he'd just delivered a death sentence. Here's where most people make a mistake. They fight on the HOA's terms. Hearings, appeals, petty wars over the color of mailboxes. I prefer a different approach. The kind that doesn't just win the battle, but makes the other side wish they'd never picked the fight. I started with the county records office. Turns out, the HOA had been quietly expanding its map over the years, annexing slivers of land that weren't theirs. My driveway? Not legally part of their jurisdiction. The road they claimed as private? Built and maintained with county funds. That alone could wipe out half their bylaws. But I wasn't done. A friend in the volunteer fire department told me that interfering with firefighting aircraft was a federal offense. He said the words, FAA violation, like someone might say, nuclear option. 2 days later, I was on the phone with a guy from the FAA's Law Enforcement Assistance Program. He didn't laugh when I explained what happened. In fact, he asked me to send every detail: names, times, photos, the voicemail from Pamela. His tone got sharper when I mentioned the helicopter crew had to maneuver around people waving them off. "That's obstruction," he said. "We'll need statements from the pilot." I was careful not to tip my hand to the HOA. When Barry sent me another reminder letter, I just smiled and thanked him for his thorough documentation. I wanted him confident, even a little cocky. That's why the next twist was so perfect. 3 weeks later, I was sipping coffee on my porch when a convoy of black SUVs rolled into the HOA's parking lot. Not county deputies, not state police. The side doors opened and out stepped men in FBI windbreakers. You could almost hear the collective gasp from behind lace curtains as they knocked on the HOA office door. Barry came out first, all smiles, until one agent held up a badge and started asking questions. Pamela and Rick weren't far behind, their clipboards suddenly looking like incriminating evidence. I didn't hear what was said, too far away. But I did see Barry's smile fade, and I did see an agent point toward my property. And that, right there, was when I knew the real game had just begun. By the next morning, the neighborhood had transformed into a slow-motion crime documentary. Every dog walker moved at half speed when passing the HOA office, pretending to tie shoelaces while watching the SUVs. Even the retirees who usually lived for gossip didn't dare knock on my door. They weren't sure if I was the victim, the suspect, or the mastermind. I didn't bother clarifying. Barry, however, decided silence was a form of weakness. By noon, a mass email from the HOA landed in every inbox with the subject line, "Unfounded allegations against your HOA leadership." It was a masterclass in faux professionalism, sprinkled with passive-aggressive flourishes. According to Barry, the FBI's casual visit was part of a routine community safety check, and completely unrelated to any false reports made by disgruntled residents. He never used my name, but when he wrote about individuals seeking personal gain at the expense of neighborhood harmony, I could almost hear his teeth grinding. I replied exactly once, and only to Barry, noted. "I'll forward your statement to the FAA investigator for context." No threats, no capital letters. Just a pebble dropped into the pond. His response came 4 minutes later, one sentence. "Any communication with federal agencies regarding HOA matters must go through the board." Translation: he was panicking. The next escalation came from Pamela, who decided the best defense was an offense involving paperwork. She started sending me daily compliance inspections for ridiculous things. One day it was unapproved decorative lighting, because I had strung a single solar lantern near my porch. Another day it was unauthorized structural modification, because I repaired my own fence post without submitting a diagram. Then came the most desperate move yet, Rick showing up at my door with a camera around his neck, taking close-up shots of my gutters. "Overflow risk," he said when I asked if I could help him find a hobby. He clicked the shutter again, eyes darting toward the pond. "Also, your water feature is a breeding ground for mosquitoes. That's a health hazard. HOA policy says we can order its removal." I leaned against the railing and smiled. "My water feature? You mean the one the helicopter used to save your house?" His jaw twitched, but he didn't answer. I let him take as many photos as he wanted. In fact, I encouraged it. Every image was more evidence of harassment for the FAA file, which had now grown into a tidy binder on my kitchen table. The thing about bullies is they can't help but overreach. That week, I learned from a county clerk that Barry had filed a formal easement expansion request months earlier, a sneaky attempt to legally absorb my driveway into HOA property. It was still pending. Normally, I would have just opposed it at the hearing, but now I had bigger plans. I scheduled a call with the FAA investigator. Let's call him Agent Grant. He had a voice like a man who read safety warnings for a living. Grant told me he'd already spoken with the helicopter crew and their commanding officer. They confirmed Barry and company had physically waved them off mid-emergency. More importantly, they documented it in their incident log. That, Grant said, made it federal. Still, Grant warned me these things take time. The FAA isn't in the habit of moving fast unless lives are currently at risk. Which gave me an idea. What if I could prove that the HOA's interference wasn't an isolated incident? My chance came sooner than expected. A brush fire broke out along the highway 2 weeks later, close enough that you could smell the burn from my yard. It wasn't threatening homes yet, but fire crews set up staging nearby. That's when Barry parked his Lexus at the entrance to the firebreak road, arms crossed like a toll booth attendant. I watched from my porch through binoculars as a county fire marshal pulled up, clearly irritated. Barry was shaking his head, pointing at a laminated map. The marshal pointed toward the ridge, gesturing for him to move. Barry just stood there, grinning. The standoff didn't last long. The marshal radioed something, and within minutes, 2 sheriff's deputies pulled in. They had a short conversation with Barry, who finally backed his car into the HOA lot. The deputies didn't arrest him, but they did take note. From my vantage point, I caught every detail on video. By the next morning, my footage had already been emailed to Agent Grant, along with timestamps and location data. I also sent it to the county fire department's public information officer, just to make sure the right people knew this wasn't a one-off fluke. Barry must have realized something shifted, because the HOA's tactics turned oddly quiet. No more daily inspections. No golf cart surveillance. It was like they'd been told to stop poking the bear. I'd almost started to enjoy the silence, until I spotted 2 men in suits standing by my pond one afternoon. They weren't FBI. These guys had the "we're here to talk about insurance" vibe. One of them introduced himself as working with the HOA's liability firm. He asked a lot of leading questions about my pond, its depth, whether children had access, if I'd considered fencing it off. The other man took photos, scribbling note. When I asked if this was a prelude to them trying to fill it in, they just smiled and said, "We're here to assess potential hazards to the community." That night, I pulled county water rights documents and confirmed what I suspected. The pond was legally classified as an agricultural water source, tied to my land deed. Destroying or altering it without my permission would be not just a civil violation but a criminal one. The next morning, I sent copies of those documents to both the HOA board and their insurance firm, CCING Agent Grant for good measure. I didn't add commentary. Let them read between the lines. 3 days later, the biggest twist yet landed in my lap, literally in my mailbox. An anonymous envelope containing internal HOA emails, printed out and paper-clipped in order. No return address, no note. The first email was from Barry to Pamela, dated 2 weeks after the helicopter incident, saying, "We need to frame this as misuse of HOA property. If we let him get away with this, others will think they can ignore us." The second was from Pamela to Rick, "Push mosquito hazard angle hard. Insurance is on board if we can show liability." The rest were just as incriminating. Plans to manipulate maps, pressure county staff, and even one line from Barry about keeping the feds in the dark until we can spin this. I read them twice, then locked them in my desk drawer. Whoever sent them either wanted the HOA taken down or wanted me to do their dirty work. Either way, I suddenly had leverage I hadn't even dreamed of. When I called Agent Grant to tell him, his tone shifted from professional interest to outright focus. "You need to scan and send those to me immediately," he said. "And don't tell anyone you have them." That was fine by me. In fact, the less Barry knew, the better. I wanted him to wake up one morning with no idea how the walls had closed in. And judging by the way the HOA parking lot was filling with unfamiliar cars again that week, I wasn't the only one aiming for that outcome. The stage was set. I just needed to push one more domino, and the entire structure Barry had built was going to collapse in public. The first domino fell on a Tuesday morning, and it wasn't even me who pushed it. I woke up to the sound of a news van idling near the HOA parking lot. By the time I stepped outside with my coffee, 2 more had joined it. Tripods sprouted on the grass like invasive weeds, and a cameraman was framing a shot with the HOA office in the background. Barry emerged in a crisp blue blazer, walking with that overdone confidence politicians use when they're about to say something stupid on live TV. He stopped just short of the cameras, holding up both hands like a preacher calming a congregation. "This community," he began, voice booming, "has been the target of false narratives and malicious lies. We will not be intimidated." I could tell he was trying to get ahead of something. My guess? Those emails had leaked somewhere they weren't supposed to. A reporter cut him off with the question that made me nearly spit coffee onto the porch. "Mr. Fenton, do you deny ordering your board members to obstruct a firefighting helicopter?" Barry blinked twice. "I categorically deny all allegations of wrongdoing. Any documents suggesting otherwise are fabricated." The thing is, Barry is the kind of man who believes that if he says something confidently enough, it becomes truth. But in that moment I knew he was in trouble, because behind him, through the glass door of the HOA office, I saw Pamela pacing with a phone pressed to her ear, face the color of printer paper. I didn't have to guess for long. By noon, my phone rang. It was Agent Grant, his voice a mix of satisfaction and controlled urgency. "The emails are in circulation. Not from us. Do you still have your originals?" I told him I did. "Good. Sit tight. Things are going to move quickly now." The next quick thing was a county notice posted on the HOA office door the following morning. "Easement expansion request denied." My driveway was safe. Barry had just lost a 2-year campaign in one typed sentence. I took a photo and framed it in my kitchen. But that was the small victory. The bigger wave hit 2 days later, when the FAA's investigation went public. The headline read, "Local HOA under federal review for obstruction of firefighting aircraft." And under that, a quote from an FAA spokesperson. "Such actions can result in significant penalties, including fines and criminal charges." Barry called an emergency community meeting in the HOA's beige-carpeted clubhouse. I went, mostly to watch the implosion in real time. The room smelled faintly of burned coffee and stale muffins. Maybe 30 residents sat in folding chairs, whispering. Barry took the front, Pamela to his right, Rick to his left. He launched into a speech about government overreach and neighbors turning against neighbors. Then he made the mistake of opening the floor for questions. First hand up, a woman in the second row. "Is it true you tried to keep the helicopter from landing on his property?" She jerked her chin toward me. Barry gave a polished, misunderstanding answer. Then a man in the back stood and asked, "Is it true you wanted to drain his pond so we could avoid liability?" Pamela jumped in to claim that was taken out of context, but her voice cracked. Then came the kicker, an older gentleman near the door, voice booming louder than Barry's. "Is it true the FBI was here because of you?" The silence that followed could have swallowed the whole room. Barry tried to regain control, but it was like watching a dam crack under pressure. People started muttering, shifting in their seats, some openly glaring at the board. Finally, a middle-aged guy in a flannel shirt said exactly what everyone was thinking. "I don't care what the bylaws say. If a fire's coming, get out of the damn way." I didn't speak. I didn't have to. The meeting ended with Barry promising a formal statement next week. Half the room left before he finished the sentence. I figured that was the big twist for the week, until I came home the next evening to find my gate open and a backhoe parked near my pond. 2 men in reflective vests were unspooling a hose into the water. When I asked what they thought they were doing, the foreman said they were there to test for contamination after a complaint from the HOA. I laughed, maybe too loudly. "Contamination? You mean the same pond the fire department praised for being clean enough to use in an emergency?" He shrugged. "We just got the work order." I called the county environmental office, gave them the work order number, and got an immediate call back from a supervisor who sounded confused. "That's not ours," she said. "That's a private order. Who's paying for it?" By then I already had my guess. Sure enough, a little digging revealed the HOA had hired a private environmental consultant, trying to get something, anything, they could use to force me to alter or drain the pond. The flaw in their plan? Any work on my pond without my consent was trespassing. I let the crew finish their test, then politely informed them they'd need to provide all results to me as the property owner. They didn't like it, but they left without further argument. The next morning, I sent a certified letter to the HOA citing state trespass laws and notifying them that all further entry onto my property without consent would be met with legal action. I CC'd their insurance firm and agent Grant. It was that CC that triggered the next twist. Within 48 hours, Grant called again, this time to say the DOJ was reviewing related materials. I asked what that meant. He said only, "It means your HOA is in deeper water than they think." And just when I thought the universe had exhausted its supply of poetic timing, another package arrived at my door, this one not anonymous. The return address was a law firm 2 towns over. Inside, a subpoena. I was being called as a witness in a federal case. The caption read, "United States vs. Barry Fenton et al." That's when it hit me. The real storm hadn't even started. All the fines, all the harassment, all the smug little speeches were just the prelude. The next act would happen in a courtroom, under oath, with Barry and his board sitting exactly where they'd never imagined themselves, on the defendant's side of the aisle. The night before my testimony, I walked down to the pond. The water was still, reflecting the moonlight, the same way it had the night the helicopter came. I thought about how close the fire had come, how absurd it was that anyone would try to block help just to preserve some imagined authority. And I decided, right there, that I wasn't going to settle quietly. Because some fights you don't pick, but once they land on your doorstep, you make sure they end in a way the other side will never forget. Federal courtrooms aren't like they look on TV. There's no gavel-slamming judge bellowing "order" every 5 minutes. It's quieter, more deliberate, like the air itself is holding its breath. When I walked in for the hearing, Barry was already at the defense table, flanked by 2 attorneys who looked like they billed by the minute and sneered for free. Pamela and Rick sat a row behind him, pale and rigid, as if pretending they were just curious onlookers. I took my seat at the witness stand when called, placing my right hand on the Bible, answering the oath without ceremony. The prosecutor, a tall man with an expression that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else, began by laying out the facts. A wildfire, a firefighting helicopter, and a series of interactions that might constitute obstruction under federal law. The jury perked up when he played the voicemail from Pamela. Her voice, dripping with indignation, declaring my pond, HOA water, and threatening a lien, it filled the room like bad perfume. Pamela avoided my eyes, staring down at her folded hands. Then came the footage. First, the helicopter dipping into my pond while Barry flailed below, waving his arms. Then, from a separate day, Barry parked at the firebreak road, blocking the fire marshal. The prosecutor asked me to confirm I had taken both videos. I did. Barry's lawyer stood for cross-examination, trying for a smile that landed somewhere between charm and condescension. "Would you describe yourself as having a contentious relationship with the HOA?" "I'd describe it as unnecessary," I said. A couple jurors smiled. The lawyer tried to paint me as a troublemaker, someone who deliberately provoked HOA leadership to embarrass them. I let him dig the hole, answering calmly, then finally said, "If by provoke you mean not letting my property burn down, then yes. Guilty as charged." Even the judge cracked the faintest smirk. The turning point came when the prosecutor introduced the printed emails I'd received anonymously. He asked if I'd seen them before. I confirmed I had, then watched as the jury's eyes moved over the bolded lines. "We need to frame this as misuse of HOA property," Push mosquito hazard angle, keep the feds in the dark. Barry's lawyer objected to authenticity, but the prosecutor produced a forensic report showing the emails came from the HOA's own server. And with that, the room shifted. You could feel it, the unspoken verdict forming in people's heads. After lunch recess, the FAA investigator, Agent Grant, took the stand. He explained in meticulous detail how federal aviation law treats interference with firefighting aircraft. His words were dry, but his tone carried weight. Lives are lost when seconds are wasted. In this case, seconds were wasted. Barry stared straight ahead, jaw tight. The defense tried one last trick, suggesting the helicopter wasn't in immediate danger and that Barry was merely ensuring proper procedure. Grant didn't blink. If a civilian interferes with emergency aircraft, intent is irrelevant. It is obstruction. Full stop. When closing arguments wrapped, I expected the judge to announce a lengthy deliberation. Instead, she said the jury had reached a verdict in under 2 hours. Barry was found guilty on 2 misdemeanor counts: obstruction of federal firefighting operations and trespass. Pamela was hit with a misdemeanor conspiracy charge. Rick got off with a warning, though I suspect his days on the board were numbered. But the legal penalties weren't the real blow. The real blow came 3 days later when the local paper ran a front-page story with the headline, HOA Leaders Guilty in Wildfire Interference Case. The article included my videos, quotes from Agent Grant, and, just for flair, a photo of the helicopter dipping into my pond. The HOA's name was in bold print above the fold, and Barry's face was right there, caught mid-gesture, looking like he was trying to wave away a tornado. That same day, a petition circulated through the neighborhood to dissolve the HOA entirely. I didn't start it. I didn't need to. Residents who'd once kept their heads down were now knocking on my door to sign. The petition gained 60% of homeowners in a week, enough to force a vote. Barry called one last informational meeting to save his empire. This one was in the clubhouse again, though the turnout was smaller and angrier. He tried to spin the conviction as political theater and a misunderstanding exploited by outsiders. Someone in the back yelled, "You're the outsider." Pamela stayed silent, her clipboard gone. Rick didn't show up at all. Then came the final twist of the night. An older resident named Mrs. Keating stood up, holding a manila folder. "Barry, I've been on the board for 15 years, and I've never seen such recklessness. These," she said, holding up papers, "are invoices for legal expenses charged to the HOA's emergency reserve without a vote. You spent $48,000 defending yourself, and you're trying to bill all of us." The room erupted. Voices overlapped, chairs scraped back. Someone slammed a fist on a table. Barry's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again, but no words came out. Finally, he stormed out, Pamela trailing behind him. The vote to dissolve the HOA passed 2 weeks later. I'd like to say that was the end of it. That Barry disappeared quietly, Pamela took up gardening, and Rick learned to enjoy crossword puzzles. But in the real world, people like them don't just vanish. They regroup. They try again somewhere else. The difference now was that everyone in this neighborhood knew exactly who they were dealing with. And more importantly, they knew how to push back. The day the HOA officially dissolved, I walked down to the pond again. The sun was setting, the water calm except for the occasional ripple from a dragonfly landing. My land was mine again, free from absurd fines and golf cart patrols. In the distance, the ridge still bore the scar of the wildfire, charred trees, blackened soil, but my house stood untouched. That night, over a quiet dinner, I got one last call from Agent Grant. "Thought you'd like to know," he said, "Barry's under review for perjury. Pamela too. And Rick's talking." I didn't ask what Rick was saying. I didn't need to. Some victories aren't loud. They're the kind you feel when you wake up in the morning and realize there's no one left to tell you what you can do with your own pond, your own driveway, your own life. And that, I decided, was better than any headline. You'd think after being convicted, humiliated in the press, and watching his HOA collapse in record time, Barry would slink off to lick his wounds in private. But Barry wasn't built for quiet exit. It started subtly, unmarked envelopes in mailboxes, each containing a letter typed in all caps about neighborhood decay and the loss of property values. No signature, but the phrasing was so unmistakably Barry's it might as well have been printed on personalized stationery. He warned of loose dogs, unkempt lawns, and strangers parking on your street, now that there was no HOA. And of course, he urged residents to consider reinstating organized leadership before it's too late. Most people tossed them straight into the trash. A few nervous retirees asked me if I thought the neighborhood would go downhill. I told them the only downhill we had to worry about was Barry's slide into irrelevance. But privately, I kept my guard up. Then came the late-night visit. First it was just a strange feeling, lights outside my bedroom window, a faint crunch of gravel on the driveway. The third night, I caught him on my security camera, standing near the pond with a flashlight, staring at the water. He stayed for maybe 30 seconds, then left without touching anything. I sent the footage to Agent Grant. His reply was short, "Not illegal yet. Keep recording." By the end of the week, he escalated. I came home one evening to find my gate padlock cut clean through and tire tracks in the dirt leading down toward the pond. At the edge of the water, a pile of something foul-smelling steamed in the cool air. Dead fish. Dozens of them. I didn't touch them. I called the county sheriff's office, filed a vandalism report, and gave them my camera footage. Barry wasn't visible, but the tracks matched his Lexus's tires exactly. The deputy shook his head, muttering something about childish grudges. I knew Barry was baiting me, to either confront him directly or lash out in some way he could spin as harassment. So I didn't give him the satisfaction. Instead, I called a friend in the state environmental agency. She confirmed what I'd been hoping. Dumping contaminants into a water source classified for agricultural use isn't just vandalism, it's an environmental crime with serious penalties. While the agency began their investigation, Barry tried a different approach. He started showing up at local council meetings during the public comment period, railing about dangerous water hazards in residential areas. He never named me, but he didn't have to. He would use phrases like, "the notorious helicopter pond," and "the anti-HOA agitator who undermined community safety." The problem for him was that his reputation preceded him. People rolled their eyes, council members shifted in their seats, and one even told him bluntly, "Sir, this is not the forum for personal vendettas." 2 weeks later, the environmental agency called me. They'd matched the contaminants in the pond to a specific brand of pesticide, and guess whose property tax records showed bulk purchases of that exact brand last month? They wanted a formal statement. I gave them one. And I gave them something else. A copy of the anonymous emails from months ago. In one, Barry had joked to Rick about poisoning the pond to make the mosquito complaint real. Rick had replied, "LOL, kidding, right?" Barry's answer, "Sure. Kidding." 3 days after that, a green and white state environmental truck pulled into Barry's driveway, followed by 2 sheriff's cruisers. I didn't see the arrest, but the rumor mill spun into overdrive within hours. By evening, the local paper ran another story. Former HOA president arrested on environmental charges. Pamela and Rick's names weren't mentioned this time. Barry was alone on this one. I thought maybe, this would finally be it. But Barry's last move wasn't about winning. It was about taking a parting shot. A week after his arrest, just before dawn, I woke to the sound of a vehicle idling outside my gate. I checked the security feed, Barry's Lexus. He sat there for almost 10 minutes, engine running, staring straight at the camera. Then he drove away. That same afternoon, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. A woman's voice, calm and professional, introduced herself as Barry's new attorney. "My client wishes to inform you," she said, that he intends to pursue civil action against you for defamation, loss of income, and emotional distress. I laughed. I couldn't help it. Tell your client I'll be happy to see him in court again, I said. And tell him to bring a bigger shovel this time. He's going to need it. That night, I printed out every court document, news article, video still, and piece of correspondence from the entire saga. I bound it neatly, labeled the cover, the Barry Files, and dropped it off at the county records office with a notarized statement making it all part of the public record. The beauty of public records is that anyone, future employers, landlords, even curious neighbors, can look them up. Barry never filed that civil suit. Maybe his attorney explained what public record meant. Maybe he realized he'd already burned every bridge in a 5-mile radius. Either way, within a month, his house went on the market. The listing used words like charming and spacious, but it couldn't hide the fact that it had been the command center for one of the most notorious HOA debacles in county history. He was gone by the end of summer. No goodbye, no last letter. Just a sold sign where his self-importance used to be. Pamela stayed, but she kept to herself. No more clipboards. Rick started jogging in the mornings, waving awkwardly if we passed each other. The neighborhood adjusted to life without the HOA. Lawns grew at their own pace, Christmas lights went up without forms in triplicate, and the only golf carts were for actual golf. As for me, I rebuilt the pond's banks, stocked it with new fish, and added a bench by the water. Sometimes I sit there in the evenings, listening to the frogs, watching the light fade over the ridge. The scars from the wildfire are still there, but so is the green that's slowly returning. Every once in a while, I'll get a call from someone in another town who's dealing with a power-drunk HOA. Word about what happened here has spread. They ask for advice. I always tell them the same thing. Keep your evidence, know your rights, and never let them convince you the fight isn't worth it. Because sometimes you don't just win for yourself. Sometimes you make sure no one else has to fight the same battle again. And that, in the end, was the real victory, one Barry couldn't poison, fine, or wave away.